I need a table for an event. It needs to be portable. It needs multiple layers for gameplay, and it needs a gimmick. Don't worry, we won't be focusing too hard on the train stuff in this video. I'm not that particular flavour of nerd. Honest. That being said, the track needed tackling first. I used narrow gauge track since the sleepers on regular HO scale track are puny and unsuitable for whatever scale 40k is this week. If you want to nerd out with me, the track gauge scales out to almost exactly 3 feet in 28mm scale, which is perfect for an industrial railway, and imperfect if this is already losing your interest. Speaking of which, I'm Chris, this is Offbeat Builds, and today people are either going to be mad at me for including too much train stuff, or leaving out too much train stuff. The main part of the board is raised by 100mm, so I glued together a couple of sheets of 50mm XPS insulation foam and spent an unpleasant afternoon hacking it all to shape with an underpowered hot wire cutter, before securing it all in place on the board with some builder's PVA. Oh god, he's back on the pipe. The main structures for the chemical plant were made from this cheap kids construction toy, and if you're wondering, those 3D printed bits at the bottom are entirely unnecessary, but very helpful to make that little construction animation. I did line the edges of the 10mm XPS foam base with some 3D printed edging strips, which I think was largely pointless, but you know, when in Rome. Round the back I added some chimneys from some PVC waste pipe, all the while hoping that the floor would texture itself. To break up the pipe dream, I added some wire mesh that's meant for useful stuff like gardening and unintentionally poking holes in clothing or family members. I also threw together a quick covered structure which gives off big bike shed energy, but that corner of the terrain needed something that wasn't cylindrical. Then there were rivets. I distracted my son by telling him that Spider-Man was making lasagna in the kitchen and pulled off a daring raid on the Lego box. This act of guerrilla parenting was in service of a small communications cabinet, which in turn was in service of adding some interest further up the model. This started out with a bit of model ship rigging rope tied between two of the structures to form a support for some cabling. Said cabling looks an awful lot like some twisted up aluminium armature wire, largely because it is. Welcome to the Offbeat Galley. Today we're making some rubble. Add some gravel to a bunch of offcuts, along with some other gravel and of course only the finest chunks of coal. Season with some fine grout, give it a shake and you're left with a steaming bowl of the consequences of many untold horrors. As a let's just say wise man once said, glue me once, shame on you. Glue me twice, won't get glued again. Which is to say that my little rubellion got a coat of PVA on the base, a nice soaking of IPA to act as a wetting agent, and then a lavish pipetting of thinned PVA to lock it all down, leaving things looking rather smashed-ing. This board needed a lot of retaining walls, so I enlisted the help of a robot. Bamboo Lab kindly sent me their A1 mini printer and AMS Light multi-filament system. I've owned the slightly larger Bamboo Lab A1 printer for about 18 months now, and these two were absolute workhorses on this project. The A1 Mini is the most beginner-friendly FDM printer I've owned. I had mine set up and printing within an hour. And using Bamboo's own filament and the settings supplied in the Bamboo Studio software, every print has been a complete success. And yeah, I know this is an ad integration, but that's also been my experience with its slightly larger brother, which I did purchase myself. I've owned a lot of 3D printers over the last decade, and these two are the first that I would comfortably describe as plug and play. Assembly is easy, the software's excellent, and being able to send prints via Wi-Fi from your computer or the mobile app is a really underrated feature. The A1 Mini starts from just £149, which is mad, and if you're interested, you can use the affiliate link down in the video description. The newly minted bulkheads were secured in place against the foam with some construction adhesive, alongside the tunnel portals, and I have looked it up, apparently portals is the right word, it just feels too grandiose for, a hole. Anyway, I made a cover for the tunnel section from some foamed PVC sheet, chosen for its lightness, and proceeded to lay some tiling, which I could have purchased, but robots. The roadway sections were roughly as smooth as this simile, which is a terrible way of saying I slapped on some interior filler in a manner that should instill fear in the hearts of all but the most courageous of tradesfolk. My freshly iced slab of polymers got the texture treatment courtesy of some AK Interactive concrete terrain paste, which, after some smoothing, does look rather concrete-y. A couple of sheets of 10mm XPS foam were then laminated to make a loading dock, which also got a light buttering from the "I can't believe it's not concrete," before turning my attention to some foamed PVC tiles. Loosely following the Duncan Rhodes School of Thoroughfare Engineering, I gave the concrete a second coat of indeterminate thickness and took the opportunity to scribe in some cracks because, well, I'm from the UK and our roads are inspirational. Does it even count as an industrial wasteland if you don't break out the corrugated paper? I gave my new sinusoidal pal a polite battering to create the illusion of many years of impolite battering, and then sealed in the goodness with a coat of matte Mod Podge to arrest its state of decay. Mine's brown because I put paint in it for another project, and I'll admit, it does look a bit suspect. After googling for some transportation, I found this, which, while undeniably brilliant, wasn't that helpful, but this little Kerr Stewart loco seemed to fit the diesel punk vibe of imperial vehicles in the 41st millennium. eBay provided me with this well-loved little tank engine, or at least its chassis, for which I printed a cover plate to save a few hours of work wrangling styrene sheet. Except for this bit, which I glued on top to save having to sand down the texture from the build plate. Oh, and these bits I added to the side to provide a bit of detail to the, I want to say, side skirts. Axle boxes were next, which were simply squares of 3mm foamed PVC with a fistful of details thrown at them. These were then glued to some 0.5mm styrene and given the old nail art treatment. An accidental benefit of the construction meant that I could form a styrene to styrene bond, which meant I could break out the Tamiya extra thin cement for the first time in this build, thereby fulfilling my contractual obligation to the Extra Thin Corporation. The superstructure of the locomotive was constructed from 1mm foam PVC with the usual rivet details and window frames cut from styrene tube. The 1-2-3 block and magnet setup is getting good use here to keep everything square and true. The bonnet, or hood if you're the sort of person that keeps the Atlantic Ocean on your right, followed the same path as the cab, while the rear of the logo is made up from some 2mm square styrene profile. Some 0.5mm styrene was bent round a can to form a roof, and through the magic of editing, some rivets appeared. Then came the greeblies. A few minutes spent burrowing in the bits box was a worthwhile exercise to locate a fistful of detail parts that would help ground the locomotive in some sort of Grimdark universe. And that, my friends, is a locomotive. A yellow one, for reasons. Back on the table, I filled in a couple of the corner areas and added this neat pipe bridge that I designed and printed, along with a pair of pump houses that I constructed from some offcuts of XPS foam, which I lightly detailed. Then it was time for rubble, more of it, following the same procedure of glue, sprinkle, alcoholism, and then some judicious pipette work. While I was in a texturing place, I textured the remaining parts of the place. At this point, I thought I should probably slap some paint on to see how well it all tied together. A base coat of German grey went through the airbrush, which was suboptimal, but rattle cans and rain aren't a winning combination. There are around a dozen feet of rusty walls that needed painting, so I devised a method that was fast enough to avoid psychosis, but good enough to look effective at normal viewing distances. After base coating in red-brown, I sponged on some dark grey. The purpose of this was to add some variation in value and hue before getting onto the more gritty stuff. Said grit was achieved by blowing very thin paint off of my brush onto the surface. This can be done with a straw, but I've got a compressor, so why? This produces almost microscopically fine grains of colour alongside a few larger droplets, and after repeating the process with various browns, greys, olives and oranges, you get something like this. Now, it's not perfect by any means, but it only cost me half a day to do the whole board, and I think it looks good enough to sell the illusion of rust. While I was in the mood for greebling, I built some scatter terrain for the main board. The barrels and ammo crates were placed around in various caches to provide some ground cover and help create little scenes within the settings. Then it was time to get into the weeds with the odd skeleton, some candles to class up the joint, and, of course, weeds. I built this table as a centrepiece for an event that I want to run later in the year for Grim Team. Lord knows how it's going to play, but it's sure fun to look at. Building something like this in the 2 weeks I had available was only possible with the help of 3D printing, so thanks to Bamboo Lab for helping me out with the project, and to you for watching. And if you like the idea of this Grim Team event, I guess I sort of soft launched it there, so watch this space. Next time out, it's Doom.